Okay, we're recording. And the other thing I want to make sure you remember is you don't need to know how to do everything in project one yet, and you shouldn't actually. So you shouldn't have to know what Heroku is yet, how to deploy things. All you need to do is know like Flask, HTML, just everything that's basic for milestone one. And slowly, as you're learning each next part, you can build on it and kind of figure out as you go. And then the other thing is there's tons of stuff on Slack and office hours that you can reference. Nakib, yeah, you said you have a question. You do have a homework, Julio, that we are just posting. And what's the difference between Cloud9? Okay, I didn't even know there's a competitive gaming thing called Cloud9, so I can't tell you. And for the CSS questions, I'm about to get into that, so hold up. Yeah, I'm gonna have to see what this competitive thing is, Nakib. You'll have to send me a link. All right, so homework 4 stuff. First thing I want to emphasize is whenever you run into any issues, first things first, make sure you check Slack. It's very likely that somebody's run into the same issue already and they posted, and then classmates have helped them out. So you might just get your answer directly from there. And that could have saved, I know it could have saved a lot of you time if you had checked Slack about the CSS thing earlier. Other thing is if you don't see it on Slack, then Google it. So a lot of times just like simply Googling will give you like first couple of results are going to have what you need and you don't even need to go further. And then you can get your answer immediately instead of waiting for something. And then finally, if you can't find anything on Slack or Google already, then of course you should definitely post and we'll help you out. But I want to make sure like first try those two things. And then if that's not working, then figure it out after that, because that's just how you do it in the industry. Google pretty much saves lives whenever I need to figure something out. And then CSS not updating, yeah, so that's super annoying and it's been happening. There's some pinned posts on the general chat about how to get around that. Some approaches are doing hard refreshes on your browser, renaming the CSS file, and then the final one that our TA found is this app.config setting. And apparently you can just put that line in your code and it will take care of everything. So apparently you don't need the refreshing and the renaming. So try that out. Look for his post on general. And then finally, I would suggest not to use the run button. It tends to be buggy. Instead, I prefer just like using the command line. And that can help sometimes just like to deal with the run issues. Joan, you haven't missed anything right now. I'm just covering a review of homework 4. And then finally, some people wanted to know how you can make the list item blue for your favorite TV show. This is within the for loop. So Ronak, you do keep the loop. This code is inside the loop. And you can actually put if statements. So you can conditionally return a blue list item versus not a blue list item. And the way you're saying blue versus not blue is through classes, which allows you to add some custom styling to certain elements, but not others. So I've posted this code here just so you can look back at it. I'm not going to dive that deep in because we have a lot to cover today. Okay, and then one more thing was for assignments, I just want to make a clearer late policy. And let me see, some people are talking about the CSS. Yeah, Hemong, you could have done that too. You could have done like nth child and just done that. That's another way. That totally works. And Joan, yeah, try out the suggestions for the CSS on Slack. So assignments are meant to help you. Everything that we're designing in them is meant to like give you some first steps for how to do the projects. And then we're grading them on completion and effort. So obviously I don't want you just submitting random files and putting like 1 letters or something to fill a text box. But as long as we can see that you're trying, then you're going to get full points. So don't worry about getting the correct answer versus not. These are pretty low risk. And then for full credit, make sure you're submitting it by the start time of next class. The due date will be on Canvas as well. And if you need extensions and have a fair reason, please reach out to me in advance. So if you do that, then we'll try to be accommodating. Otherwise, if it's more of a last minute emergency, then it doesn't matter when you tell us. Take care of yourself first. Now, the main thing I'm adding here is for half credit, you can actually submit your homework up to the upcoming project deadline. So it's okay if you didn't do like one of the homeworks between homework 1 and like homework 7. If you finish it before the project deadline, like February 15th, then you'll still get half credit. And I'm hoping this encourages anybody who didn't get to finish the assignments to still complete them and learn. Kadeem, you didn't have to upload code. Yeah. And Jinchul, P1 deadline in this case is going to be the final milestone. So yeah, milestone 2. Okay. This is going to be a very fast class with a lot of content, just because I want to make sure that I give you as much knowledge as possible around APIs and Git so that you can work all week on your project. First thing we're going to start with is APIs. I want to ask you guys, why do you think we should care about APIs, and why are third-party APIs useful or important? You might see big companies like Facebook. We don't actually use that many third-party APIs, so why should we even cover it? Nikib, you said don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah, that's huge. So in software engineering, a big part of coding is not having to write everything from scratch. If you did that, then nobody would ever finish any projects. So you need APIs and you need to leverage other people's code in order to make something more functional. What else? Why else are APIs cool? What can we do with them? Matthew, yeah, dynamically get data. So maybe you don't happen to have a database on your own of all the possible like songs and artists on your own computer. Well, in that case, then it's useful if you can just listen to Spotify's database and get those from there. So that opens up a whole world of kind of data that you can access and play around with in your projects. Anything else? Okay, yeah, I think you guys covered it. Not reinventing the wheel is obviously huge. You don't want to do things from scratch. And then also, one more thing is, even though Facebook, we might not use third-party APIs, you are going to end up using some sort of like internal APIs for each other. So there's whole teams at Facebook that build APIs for other teams to then use to make their lives easier. So it doesn't matter if it's third party or not, APIs in general are just used everywhere. And we kind of talked about this in lecture 2, so a little while ago. An API is an application programming interface. Basically, it's those rules that allows programs to get to talk to each other. And it'll give you some powerful functionality that an application has without having to actually write that application. And in this class, we're mainly going to be talking about web APIs, which help you get some sort of data over the internet. Are there any APIs that you guys have used that you like or that you've heard of that seem interesting? Not Spotify or Genius, but other things. Twitter, yeah, Twitter's huge, Descartes. You can do like real-time tweets and parse those. Random generator, okay, yeah, get some random numbers. Google Maps, yeah, that's also huge. Weather APIs, yeah, Twilio is cool. It lets you like programmatically text people or call people up. Watson, yeah. Mamon asked, what's the difference between an API and a wrapper? Well, in many cases, a wrapper can be an instance of an API. It all depends. Is it exposing something to another developer to use? And that would be an API built on an API. Google speech text, AdMob. Okay, lunar magic. I haven't heard of it, Rona. I'll have to look into that. To auto 10 class. Oh shit. Okay. I didn't even know that's a thing. All right. I'll have to look into that. Selenium. Okay, wow. You guys have been really thinking up stuff. I will have to see this class one though. Huh. So web APIs in general, we call them REST APIs, and it kind of stands for representational state transfer. Doesn't really matter what that means though. And those are just going to be the rules that your API is following. So in a REST API, there's a client and a server. The client is giving a request, making a request through some URL, and then the server is returning a response, which is going to be some data object or HTML. And this is often going to use the HTTP standard that we're going to cover. Okay, Chrome driver, Pi Auto GUI, and datetime. I'm going to have to look into this stuff. I think this can make my life easier as well. And I need to see what you guys are hacking to get around things in this class. So I just drew up this architecture. And here, this is kind of what our project one is going to look like. And I wanted to just give you that picture of like what the front end, the back end is. There's a couple different servers going on, different things like that. You can look at this in detail later on, but I wanted to highlight one point, and that is, where are the clients in this architecture? There's actually multiple clients. So can you guys tell me, like, what are the clients you see? The ones that are making requests. Descartes said front end. So yeah, your browser is going to make a request to Flask, or that's built on Flask. And then Flask is going to say, oh, for this slash endpoint, I'm returning you HTML. And then Nikki, Mike, Philip said, you're also going to have the backend. So your web server is also a client for the Spotify and Genius servers. So you have two sets of servers going on, or sets of clients going on here. The backend, our backend is going to act as a client to Spotify and Genius and talk to their APIs in order to access their data. And you could keep going on and have, multiple levels of clients and servers. It doesn't have to be just one. Yep. Cool. Philip, you said the same thing. And now I'm going to talk about like what a request looks like. So one thing that's kind of the base of a request is your endpoint, or the URL that you're requesting. Here you can see I gave the root for Spotify, which will be like api.spotify.com, blah, blah, blah. And then you can have a specific path for that after that root. So in the API, let's say here, I want to see the top tracks of my artist. This would be my full URL. And then you can add query parameters after the path. So after top tracks, you're going to see question mark, and then some like key value pairs, like something equals something. And this is your way to add some kind of arguments to the function. You're basically refining your query and saying, I only want my top tracks in the US in this case. And you could do different values. The second part for a request is the method, or HTTP method. There's a couple different methods, but the ones you'll use most often are get and post. Get is for like a read operation. So whenever you want to just like access some data and see what it is. And then post will be if you have to write something. So maybe you want to create like on Twitter, when you're making a new tweet, then you might use a post operation. And also in the case of Spotify, you're going to need post in order to create your access token, which helps you then get some data. And then you're going to have headers and data, which are kind of extra information in your request for things like authentication and other stuff. So how do you actually make a call to an API? Well, the first answer is it just depends what code you're using, what library, what language you're on. So if you're just on your terminal, you can make a request to an endpoint just with this command curl. So I put an example here. You can do like curl get and then the URL and all and whatnot with the headers. And that can be like a lightweight way to test something in your terminal instead of opening up like a file and running it in some code. Now for your project one, you're going to be using the requests library in Python. And this is going to have methods like get and post, where you provide the URL, your headers, your params, things like that. And based on that, you can get the data. And after you make the request, your whatever the server is most likely going to be returning data in this JSON format, JavaScript object notation. And this is like commonly used across a lot of REST APIs. And it allows you to parse through like a nested data structure very easily. And so here I put just a quick example. If you have this body of data, which I took from Spotify, you could go through it by using these brackets. So similar to how you use a dictionary in Python, you could do data and then go into the artists field, and then you could go deeper. That's an array. So you would access part of the array with an index, and then you could go deeper in with name, so on and so on. And in order to be able to do that, you'll need to take your response that you get back, which is going to be a string, and do .json, which will convert it into this kind of object format. And all this stuff, I know I'm moving fast. I'm going to show you in the demo coming up. Finally, the last thing is APIs are always going to have some authorization, or usually. This is going to be in the form of like some keys or tokens, which kind of act as passwords, so that the API or like the server knows that you are a valid user who's calling their database. You don't want just to open up your database, altering it, reading it to just anyone, because then people could take advantage of that, like hackers and things like that, and that could be bad for you. And one thing to note actually is there's a difference between authorizing the user and authorizing the client. In some cases, you might want to authorize the user. So say we're dealing with Spotify. If I want to be able to make an app where a user can play around with their own library, so their own saved songs and things like that, then I need user authorization. They have to like sign in, give credentials so that I can then show them personal data. But in the case of project one, we aren't showing user specific data, at least in an MVP. We're showing just kind of data in general from Spotify. So in that case, you only need to authorize the client, and you don't need to go further than that. Okay, so I'm going to show you a demo with New York Times' API. I've already put this code on GitHub, so you don't need to like copy it or follow along. You can just access it directly. I suggest actually that you just watch it. You don't need to really follow along because you're gonna have to make your account and stuff, which could take time. And it might be better to just pay attention and ask questions as you're going. But if you want to do it, of course, it's all yours. So let me open up the video. Okay, I'm just reading the chats. Gerard said, not for this class. Good, good, good. All right, we're gonna start. Please just think through everything I'm going through, this flow, and ask me any questions. So we're gonna practice using a third-party API and making a call to it in Python. We're actually going to be using the New York Times API as our example instead of Spotify or Genius. I'm hoping that you're going to be forced to go through it on your own, and that'll really help you learn how this process goes. But a lot of the takeaways are going to be similar to what we covered today. So usually every API is going to have some sort of developer site where they have their documentation and whatnot. and they'll have some sort of kind of get started or quick start guide. Now, I've done all this and I'm not going to go through each one. I think it's okay if you just follow along. But usually you're going to have to start by creating an account. So I can click that here and show you. You just fill out this form. And then you're going to have to sign into your account to kind of open your personal developer portal. And then finally, you're going to need to register a client or an app. So the reason for this is you're basically telling New York Times in this case that you have this new app and it's going to be making calls to their API. And they can be like, okay, cool. We're going to give you this secret token or authorization key. And we know that whenever you use that, it's coming from your app. If you have two apps, so say I have my school project in Flask and then I'm doing a side project in iOS, then those are two different clients that you have to register, which are going to use their own keys. So in this case, you can, when you're logged in, you could go to the top right and click apps and then click new app on the top right and then put in the name, the description, what APIs you want to enable and whatnot. And once it's created, you can actually open it up and it'll show you all the sorts of information you'll need. So your API keys, and I'm going to delete this client, so it's okay that you can see this, and other things. So that's the basic setup. You're going to have to do this in Spotify. You're going to have to do this in Genius as well. Now, next thing we want to know is what data do we want to fetch? What endpoints can we use? So for that, we can go to APIs and see all the documentation that shows what sorts of things you can get. The New York Times one is pretty cool. They have archives going all the way back to like 1851 if you want to see like different headlines over time. You can do article search for certain keywords, certain types of things you want to know. You can see like top stories, popular stories, all sorts of stuff. So there's a very rich data set that you can work with. And you can see how this could be cool for like a personal project if you want to see like a data visualization of how headlines are changing over the course of decades or something like that. But for now, I'm going to stick with the article search API and we're going to test this one out. When you go to the documentation, you get a few things. One are like, what is the endpoint? So after the slash, the path here for article search is article search.json. And then you're going to have like some different query parameters and stuff that you use to refine your search. And they'll show examples, like here's an example URL that you call with your API key, which is going to be really crucial in order to get your data. And then there's a ton of stuff. If I click paths, you can see even more. So you can see specifically what's the request URL, what are the query parameters you add on, like what are their formats and names, as well as in your actual response in the data you get back, what are the different fields that you can parse through to get what you want. So they have like the types. This is an array, this is an object, this is a string. And something cool you can do, even in Spotify and Genius both, are actually test out the API on your browser itself. So you don't need to use terminal or Python to just see that something's working. You can put in like parameters and your credentials and stuff here and execute the request here and see what sorts of data you're getting back. So this can be a really nice way to test it out before you get into the coding aspect. But again, I'm going to leave that up to you. And now I'm going to actually walk you through how to do a GET request in Python. So let's just start and make our file. So I'm going to call this nyt.py. And then I'm going to open it up, c9. And then, okay. And then a useful library that you can use actually, let's see. For some reason it froze up. That's okay. I just did Control-C. One library that is crucial is the requests library, and that allows you to fetch data from certain endpoints over the internet. So just make sure you have the requests library. You can do pip install requests. I have it already, so it kind of showed up already. Now I'm just going to reopen this because my Cloud9 was being a little buggy. And we start out by just simply importing requests. Requests has two methods that are going to be useful for you. One is requests.post. That can be if you want to create some sort of resource. So in Spotify, you would need that if you want to create an access token that you can then use. And then there's requests.get, which is when you're actually fetching that sort of data that you want. And then the parameters that it's going to take are your URL. So what endpoint are you fetching at? And what's the full URL for it? And then some params. So we were talking about like query parameters that this endpoint had. You can put them here. And then sometimes you need headers, like in the case of Spotify or Genius. That's where you could put like a access token or something that you need in a certain format. So params and headers both are going to be like a dictionary with key value pairs. We don't actually need headers in the case of New York Times, so I'm going to remove that for now. And then I'm going to set request.get equal to a variable, just response here. Now, let's go back to the docs and figure out what our actual URL is. So my answer is actually pretty straightforward. It's right there front and center. You can copy paste this URL and then make it a string variable. So here's my URL. In some cases, you might need to sort of concatenate the string to add some stuff on it. So maybe you need to add a certain ID right here, and then like a slash, and then maybe second endpoint. So you can slowly build your URL up by doing this sort of string concatenation. In my case, there's no need for that. So this is just the basic URL that we're starting with. And then let's actually go to our example call. That can be really helpful. So this here was the URL. And then after the URL, there's going to be a question mark whenever we have some query parameters after that. So question mark is kind of signifying everything after this is going to be my query parameters. And they're just going to be key value pairs. So Q could be the key for this parameter, and then election would be the value. So we're saying, I want to know, I want to search up all the articles by the keyword election. And then the other one here, so we would add and for our next one is API key is whatever your key is. Now, building out this kind of logic where you have to add the equal sign and then the question mark and the Q and all of that sort of thing like this, that would take forever. And luckily, requests kind of can handle that sort of formatting for you if it knows what is what. So we're telling it that we're going to have some params. Like we said, the key for one of the params is Q. And then let's see, maybe we want to search up like GameStop articles and see what all the buzz is. So that could be our keyword, the value. And then of course, you need your actual API key, which will authorize your request. So to find your key, you're going to go back here, and I'm going to open up in the top right my apps. And then I'm going to open up my specific app here. And you have a key and a secret key. Depending on the query, you might need both or not. Here, it was just saying key. So I'm going to copy this guy, go back to my workspace, and then paste it here. So now we have our key set up and our query. This is probably not good code, so I'm going to actually make this a separate variable and set this here, and then make this separate variable, and then set this here, because these things could change maybe. Now, very important thing to remember is this is really bad code. Don't do this. So we shouldn't be hard coding our API key in our actual Python file. And I'm going to show us how to get around that in our next demo. So for now, we're just going to let it slide. Okay, so we have our URL, we have our params, and that's it. Now let's test it. This is actually all we need. The only other thing we can do is, if you remember earlier, I was saying if to make it easier to parse, you can use response, which is the variable .json. And that's going to allow you to use like an object notation to work through the data structure that is returned by the API. So we have that here. And then let's just print the data to make sure that something worked. Cool. This thing is spinning here. Let me just close it, reopen it. Okay, everything is good to go. How do we test this? Now, I usually stay away from the run button just because sometimes it can be buggy. And I think the better way to do it is just always run your command in the terminal and then see the output. So Python nyt.py, and it should be making this GET request and printing out the data. Let's test it out. And here we go. We got this huge blob of text, so much stuff going on. I can't even tell what's what because there's just so much. I do see a GameStop here. I see a couple GameStops, so I think it's working as expected. And that's good. The GameStop reckoning was a long time coming. There we go. And of course, we're going to use JSON parsing to get what we actually need. What if I tried this without the key? So maybe instead of key, I just said blah, blah. Now, this key is obviously wrong. What happens if I try to make the request anyway? So the response will actually say invalid API key. So you know that this is some legit authentication. Cool. Let me take away blah, blah. So we have this data. Now, next thing we want to do is actually parse it and make it readable and workable. Say we want to only return a one specific piece of information to the UI. How can we do that? So if we go to the docs, if you remember, they actually told you the response types and kind of the field names. So here we have a map of how we can work with this huge data set and find what we need. So you have these original fields, status, copyright, response, basic stuff. Within response, there's docs, and that's going to be a list, an array of all the articles that it's found from the search. So this is the meat of what we're trying to get. So let's start by just going into response and then into docs. So I'm going to do print data and then brackets response, brackets docs. And then let's go back and see. So this is an array. It's probably going to have tons of articles in it. Let's just choose the first one. And then within that first one, we have this kind of article object, which we can parse through. So what's something interesting we could print out? You could see a snippet of the article. There's like some media. You can see the headline. So the headline could be interesting to see what's being kind of put at the top, the title. So why don't we do that? Why don't we go into the first item and then the headline, and then there's a bunch of things in the headline. Let's just do main to start with. It's probably the easiest. So after docs, I'm choosing the first in the array, and then I'm doing headline, then I'm doing main. And you just have to make sure you're following the structure exactly as it's returned. You might run into errors like, oh, key not found because you're doing something in the wrong order or forgetting one level of the object. So now I'm going to run it again. And what should we expect? We should actually see the docs, the first one from them, and then the headline of it. Okay, I'm going to run the code. And then here we go. We get the GameStop rebellion. We know that our query is working, the endpoint is searching correctly, and we're getting back an article. Awesome. Okay. Hopefully now you have a high level idea of what API calling looks like. As you can see, it's pretty cool. You only need these 18 lines of code and you are accessing like an entire archive from New York Times and you can do crazy stuff with it. Does anybody have any questions about what we did so far? Oh, cool. Okay. Elvis is saying how there's an easier way to see JSON on the browser instead with Chrome. That's good to know. And I think there's a lot of different ways where you can make it prettier when you print it out in different places. Mike's asking, do most companies provide APIs for developers? Yeah. So at any company, you're using APIs in some form. So you would never be writing something from scratch. There has to be an easier way to do something like access some data or post something and whatnot. And if you had to do things from scratch, just nothing would happen. It wouldn't be very productive. And this makes it a lot easier whenever you're writing any code. But again, at big companies, the APIs tend to be internal rather than third party, like external ones. They like to make them themselves. Josie, yeah, APIs definitely can cost money. So somebody was mentioning the Twilio API. I think that might be like $1 a month or something in order to be able to send SMS texts and calls to people, things like that. It depends. There's free ones. There's paid ones as well. Depends what kind of limit the API developer or the API company wants to put. Whether that some businesses kind of run on APIs, that's their product itself. So then they might charge for that. Okay. Cool. So we were talking about the keys. I obviously did it very wrong. And if you do it in the way that I did it in the first demo, then you're going to get an 80% at the highest on your project one. So you need to make sure you do not push your API keys to GitHub onto the internet. That is just a red flag for anybody who's coding, and you have to know how to get around that. So I'm going to be showing you how to do that in our next demo. But first, why should we even keep these secret? What's the big deal about posting this random string online? So when you do that, like it's obviously not that high of a chance, but you're exposing yourself to some risk. You're allowing some hacker somewhere to be able to hijack your keys and then do whatever bad things with them that they want to do. An example of that could be maybe they're using your API keys with Twitter to then like look up violent videos or post like bad videos, things like that. And then you could get your account suspended because of that. Or in another case, maybe a lot of times APIs are going to have rate limits, which means you can only make like, I don't know, 1,000 API calls in this hour. They don't want like their server being overloaded by one client who's just going crazy. So maybe somebody's going to go crazy with your API key and do like 1,000,000 searches per hour. And then maybe if you do that, the company could like extend some charge on you or sue you or something based on your terms of services that you've agreed to. So this is just kind of like theoretically bad things that can happen. But the main thing to remember is as a developer, it's on you to make sure that you don't put them up. Yeah, exactly, John. That's why I said it's bad code, what I did. Okay, well, now let me go into the next step, which just shows how you can hide them. And this is going to be super important for your project one. Spotify and Genius both have API keys that you'll need to hide. Okay, let me pull it up. Oops. So many windows. All right. Again, you don't need to like do this in your own code, but I think as long as you follow along, that's the key right now. So now we have the basic kind of API call with New York Times working, but we are doing it really wrong by putting our key here in our file directly. So you would be able to see it if I push this code onto GitHub, and that could lead to all the security issues we were talking about. So how can we make this more secure, more subtle? One way we can actually do this is to use our environment, so kind of our bash environment. You can actually use these sorts of magic variables that are stored on your terminal in order and access them in your files. So an example could be I could say export random variable and set it equal to random stuff. So this is my string. Now this is actually saved into my terminal and I could access it with a $sign. So I could do echo, which is just like printing, $sign, and then my variable name, random variable. And that would show up as random stuff. So it's being saved here in the background. And you could actually then access it inside of your code by doing os.getEnv and then the name of your variable. So in this case, we're saying random variable. And you would be able to access it without needing this line of code where you're actually defining that key. And remember, you need to import OS in order to do this. So in our case, let's name this better, but we could do export NYT key and equals to whatever your key is. So you would copy paste this in from your developer portal app and then press enter. And then after that, if you did echo $NYT key, then it should output the key that you just put in. So I've already put that in. I have NYT key. I'm not going to show you here though. And the only thing we need to do is write in this line os.getEnv, instead of random variable, we can now put NYT key. So now my key is not being stored anywhere on my actual Python file in the code that it's going to. It's just being stored locally on my machine separately. Let's try running this and make sure that everything is still working. So Python and then the file name. And here we go. I'm getting my GameStop articles again. But so there's an issue with this. If we do it in this way, then if I exit out of my terminal, so I just clicked close, and then I open it up again, and then I try to access this key that I had made earlier, you're not actually going to be able to do that. It shows up blank because whatever sort of environment variables you've created on the terminal, they stay in the terminal in that session, and then they're gone for the next session. So we actually have to make this more permanent now, so you can always use it no matter what session you're in. So to do that, we can actually use what's called an env file or environment file. And that's pretty simple to make. You can call it anything you want, .env. I'm just going to call it .env itself. You don't even need a name after that. So touch.env to create that file. Remember, it's a hidden file because it starts with a dot here. But if I do ls-a, then you can see that it shows up here. It doesn't have to be hidden though. Now I'm going to open up my .env file. And all you have to do here is just basically write the same exact command that you had earlier. NYT export NYT key, and then you can copy paste your key here. And then how can we actually refer to that now in the code? So this isn't a file now. We're not getting this variable directly from our sort of terminal OS type thing. So how can we get that? You can actually use this useful library called python.env. So let's first start by installing this. Let me just see what it's called. So you can run pip install -u for some reason, and then python.env. Okay, have that downloaded. And now let's actually use it. So we're going to import this library now. So from .env, you import load.env, and also this helper function find.env that we're going to use. And then the next thing that we do is we run this line of code, load.env, at the beginning of our file. And then what find.env does is it's basically looking for any .env file in your current directory. So you don't have to provide the exact path then, and it can be a little bit easier. So you start with this code here. And then now it's been added into the kind of OS memory. So this line of code here should actually work as long as NYT key is the name of the variable that we've created here. So I've updated .env with my actual key, and everything else is the same. Let's try running the code and see that it still works. Perfect. So we're getting articles again, and this is probably the best way that you can hide your API keys in a separate file, but still access them when you need to. And we're going to get into how you can make sure that you don't push your .env file to your GitHub or things online so that other people can see it. Okay. How are we feeling about hiding API keys? It makes sense? Okay, good. Seeing a lot of yeses. Hide the kids, hide the wife. Makes sense, makes sense. Okay, cool. And then, like I was saying, we're going to go into making sure that the file doesn't go to GitHub with git ignore. And Ronak, yeah, .env is a library, so you'd have to do pip install python.env. I put the code on GitHub. It's going to be linked on Canvas, and I can also just send it right now in the chat. One sec. And on the GitHub, it'll tell you exactly what you need to do, like what libraries you need to install to make everything work. All right. Okay, let's keep going now. So yeah, I went over New York Times. Every API is going to be different. They're going to have different ways of authorizing and different, documentation. But the main thing is you have to do careful research and read through their documentation to make sure that you can use a specific one. And that itself is a big part of engineering, being able to read documentation well. And yeah, and then there's also going to be lots of examples on Google if you ever need to find them. Cool. So now we are going to pivot over to version control and talk about Git. And then I'm going to give you just kind of some high level basics concepts. And then I'm going to send you off to work on a demo by yourself, which is going to be the start of your homework 5. First things first, why should we care about Git? What is version control useful for those of you who've used it, or even if you haven't used it, why do you think it could be useful to be able to track changes to projects? Maman said teams, yeah. Working with the group, Colton. So collaboration is huge. If you can see like who's made changes and when they made changes, then you can work more easily with somebody similar to like a Google Doc. Elvis said, if your code's not working, you can always get to the one that does. Yeah. So if you're constantly saving different versions of your project as it evolves, then you can go back to a stable version like Descartes said. So if you accidentally break something and you're like, oh shit, like I wish I could go back to that time when things were working. Then Git will allow you to do that. Gerard said to know to know who to fire when production breaks. Yeah, and rolling back if issues occur. Yeah, totally. I think this reminds me like when I was interning at Facebook, like way back when, I I accidentally wrote like this wrong line of code. So my if statement was backwards basically. It was checking for true and it should have checked for false. And that one line of code actually broke the ability to make Facebook posts on the mobile apps. And that was like a huge deal. And we were getting like hundreds of hundreds of like support tickets from users being like, why won't you let me send things anymore? And things like that. And I was like, I think I was, I don't know, out for dinner or something. So I wasn't checking my phone. And somebody on my team had to deal with this fire without me. So that's where Git, or in our case, Mercurial, came into play. They could quickly see like what were the last kind of issues that were made on this file, what were the last like changes, who made that change, and then how can we roll back to a version before this change so that posting is working again, and then we can do other things after that. So this is really big for fires and preventing fires, and that's why you have version control. And then, yeah, we're talking about like managing different kind of versions. So you've probably seen something like this where you're working on a paper and you keep creating like multiple versions, like your draft, your final, and then final v3. That's just a pain to manage multiple copies. If you had one all in Git, then that can make your life way easier to track. And yeah, Gerard, it does happen. I think it's a rite of passage to break like something on a huge level. And it wasn't a big deal at all. Like my manager and teammates, they didn't care because they've all done it too. And you just kind of learn from it. It's life. So version control, we'll also call it source control when it's code, just a way to think about and track changes for files. And it'll help you answer these important questions like what changes were made, who made those changes, when were the changes made, why were the changes needed? And these are all kinds of things that can help you put out a fire or just understand the evolution of a project. There's different types of version control. On the non-coding side, you'll see like Google Docs, Google Drive, you'll see Wikipedia, Dropbox. And then on the coding side, there's Git, Subversion, and Mercurial. So Mercurial is actually what we use at Facebook. And it's similar, but not the exact same. But you'll mainly see Git. That's why we're covering Git. More than 70% of developers use it around the world. So it's the most common version control. And yeah, it's not going to be the easiest to use, but things like GitHub can make it better, as well as like your text editor and things like that. They might have different helper things to use the commands. So now I want to just make sure we all know the basic terminology. First things first, you're going to have a repository or a repo. And this is going to have like all the files and folders of your project. So it's just like your project directory, but also all of the history as this project has evolved. So all the changes that the files have undergone over the course of time. And then a commit is going to be one unit of change that the developer kind of officially releases. So when you're going to change like one or more files, add, remove, edit, and then you're going to say like, this is kind of one change I want to make, and I'm going to release it out so that we can go back to it later on if needed. And then a branch. So you're probably going to be there's going to be like a main line of development, the main or master branch that you usually hear. And that's going to be like the one that usually everybody is using on your team. They're kind of referring to it as the source of truth or like the real version. Maybe that's the version that's getting deployed to your actual app. And then you're going to want to branch from those so that you're safely working on your feature without messing up the main. So that's where branches are going to come in. And next thing I want to show is just like how this flow is going to look like. We're going to start locally, just on your own kind of IDE when you're working with Git. So GitHub is out of the picture. Don't worry about that yet. You're going to have your working directory. That's just kind of like all the files that Git is tracking on your current like project directory and all the changes in them. And then you're going to have this staging area in the blue. So you move files from your working directory to the staging area with git add, this command. And this is basically saying like, these are the files and the changes that are ready to be committed officially. And then from staging, you're going to use git commit to actually make an official change, record it with your version control. And that's going to then be saved to like your official repository. So I wrote out like how to set up Git locally, as well as how to just go through a flow of changing files and making changes with version control. I'm going to go into it in the demo you watched, so I'm not going to list out the steps to you right now, but I'm leaving this here just for your reference when you see the slides later. And then next thing to talk about, I know there's a lot of terminology, bear with me right now. So next thing is the difference between a local and a remote repository. A local one is just kind of sitting directly on your in your folder on your computer. Nobody else can access it or do anything with it. And then remote is going to be sitting on some separate server that usually that everybody can then access. So you can think of it as taking your local code and then backing it up to the cloud. And then others will be able to access that code and then work with it and see it and things like that. And then that's kind of where GitHub fits in. So GitHub is a place that hosts and stores like all of your remote repositories. And because of that, they have all sorts of good stuff, features that allow you to more easily collaborate with other people on your code, share the code with each other, and things like that. So Git locally could just kind of work on its own, but GitHub is what takes it to kind of a broader place where you can share it to the world. And when you deal with GitHub or some remote repository, then you're going to use the commands git push and git pull. So pushing is kind of being able to take your local changes and then put them online to your remote place. And then pulling is maybe other people have been working on some code and you want to grab those changes and update your local files with those changes. And then again, I have some steps listed out for how you can connect to GitHub as well. And then one final thing before the demo is just like there's going to be this special hidden file called git ignore. And that's basically telling you what you shouldn't track with your version control. So now you can see like where hiding our special secret files comes in so that it's never getting considered when we push something to the internet. Okay, so we have 18 minutes. What I'm hoping is we're going to do something a little bit differently now. I want you to go to Canvas, go to homework 5, and the first question is going to link you to the demo. So instead of all of us watching this next demo together, I'm going to ask that you just do it right now on your own. The reason for that is we're all in different places of comfort with using Git and GitHub. So I want some people to be able to like pause and slow down, and then others you can just like skip through if you already know how. And then you're going to basically watch this demo and work on question 1, which is basically just initializing a repository locally and then on GitHub and pushing code to it. So I will be here. Just realized my video hasn't been on this whole time, but I'm going to be here. Come back at 1:49 so I can send you off with some closing announcements. But otherwise, spend the next 16 minutes on homework 5 and specifically just watching that demo and trying to work with it in your own Cloud9. And let me know if you have any questions. Me and David are here. John, look through homework 5. What do you want as a response? Let me check. I don't even remember. Okay, so you don't need to respond to anything on there, actually. I could have just made it like regular text. We're going to just see that you've pushed the code onto GitHub to give you credit. Yep. Okay, back at 1:49. Peter, you're going to be making your own code. NYT was just a demo, but in homework 5, you're actually going to be using the Spotify API. But for now, you don't have to actually have code. You just want to get the flow of using Git and making a repository. John, you should see the link to the demo at the very beginning of the quiz or the homework. It's a YouTube link. Okay, so now we have our New York Times demo. Jamie, it's not showing in Git status. Do you already have a git ignore file? Hmm. Okay, it showed up for me. That's kind of strange. I wonder if there's a setting that automatically doesn't show um, doesn't show hidden files. Is the end file there in your folder for sure? John, looks like you accidentally did get in it in the master folder. That's okay. I think I forget how, but you can kind of uh, delete the repository that you've created without deleting the actual folder. So try Googling how to do that. Oh, David has this for you. Thank you, David. Other John, sorry, John Houlihan. Jamie, the end file has to be in that directory that you have Git running. So it's only going to track files that are inside of the directory that you initialized Git in. That explains it. Mike, can I see your what? Your repository on GitHub? Let me check. What's it called, Mike? Yeah, you can actually check yourself on that link and see if it shows up. Gerard, you do need to be a member of the group. Are you not added yet? Okay. Did you finish homework 4 where you gave your GitHub username? Okay, some people might not be added yet. David. Okay. Check your email. You might have gotten it more recently. Okay, it looks like a few more people haven't been added. David, maybe check just to see that they're pending. Okay, so for those of you who are trying to see if you have access to the GitHub org, check the chat. David has some instructions for you. Looks like some people are getting a 404 on that link, David. Okay. So everyone come back just for a minute. If you're still working on it, that's okay. This is homework anyway, but you can also stay back for 10 minutes after class if you want to ask questions, or come to David's office hours at 2 as well. So just a couple final things to note here. One is that your homework 5 is basically going to be about being able to use Git at a basic level, and then also set up how to use the Spotify API. So this should help you a lot for getting your way to the project 1. So work on that. And now you should be able to do most of milestone 1. You have all the information you need. You don't need to know how to do like Heroku yet, or mainly just Heroku at the moment, because we're going to cover that later and it's only for milestone 2. And then another thing, next class, we are going to be doing some work in groups. I'm going to pre-assign those groups for just so you get to like build on certain like relationships and learn, talk to people more. And because I'm pre-assigning them, you can only access those groups if you're logged in with your Zoom account. So I'm going to make sure that you're required to log in order to join the meeting. So just be aware of that for Thursday. You're going to have to log into Zoom in order to join the meeting. And one final note, hopefully you guys have seen my message on Slack. If not, that's okay. But we did find that some people could access the example codes from like me and the TAs. And I want to make sure, like, we messed up there with the permissions, but it's your responsibility to make sure that you're not cheating. And I'm going to cover this more in class, but please make sure that you are not cheating. You're not using copy pasting code. We are going to make sure if you do that, that you will get a 0. Okay. Well, that's everything I had for you. Stay back for 10 minutes if you want to ask any questions or keep working on homework 5. But otherwise, I will see you all on Thursday. Bye, Josie. Bye, Netham. Bye, Mateo. Bye, Joseph. Bye, John Pierre. See ya, Ronak. Bye, Kadeem. Bye, Venkat. Bye, Elijah. See you guys. Bye, Janice. John, I'll answer your question soon. Let me see. Bye, Karel. Thanks, Gerard. Thanks for the links. Okay, for question 2, what should I submit? Let me check. John, which part are you talking about?
Question 2, Professor, because the first one says, one second, the first one says, link your project's GitHub. So I just copy and paste that one. And then the question 2 is a screenshot of your application in the Cloud Now interface. But I didn't finish. I thought you were talking about the milestone 1, but I didn't finish that yet.
Oh, okay. You're talking about the submission form for project 1?
No. It's the, wait. Oh, oh.
Oh, are you on the wrong assignment?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's what I was saying. Like earlier, I couldn't find the
Oh no, yeah. Just homework 5 and assignments.
Yeah, I was like trying to. I was so confused. I was,
yeah. Yeah, no wonder you
I
were.
was like, what the heck am I doing?
That's okay. Yeah, that happens.
Okay. Oh yeah. So now I'm able to see the Homework 5 API.
Yeah. There you go. So you have everything you need on there, hopefully, and you can work on that.
Yeah, I have to watch the video. Yeah, I didn't finish because I was confused again. I was like, what am that was in the wrong assignment.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
I texting if like if anything. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I'll see you.
All right. Bye, John. Philip, office hours for me are going to be 8 to 9:30 today. You can check on the syllabus also. It's listed there. And Canvas on the calendar. Thanks, Mike. Bye. Okay, see you. Jamie, let me know if you have any questions, if you're working on something. No worries. Yeah. You can hang on here. Okay. Sounds good. See you Thursday.